I store my money in silk because it respects the value of my labor better than the dollar does.
They're willing to take that tiny measured dose of volatility because that is actually a more honest formula for stability in long term.
And maybe that's silk's role within the world of Web3 is we're the only stablecoin brave enough to match and mirror that paradigm of trust transfer and change.
Well, welcome to The Shade, everybody. I'm Sean, and today we're talking with a man who probably doesn't even need an introduction. He is a progenitor of Shade Protocol, a mega mind behind the silk curtain. We're talking with Carter Wetzel. Thanks for making the time, Carter.
Thanks for having me on. That might be the most hyped up, amped intro I've ever received, and all I can do is put my hand on my heart and say thank you, even if it was a bit above and beyond what I believe I deserve.
Yeah, man. We're aiming for a large vocabulary. That's what we're trying for. So, yeah, and this should be a great conversation. I'm really excited to get your hot takes on some of this. You could even say, not trying to be clickbaity, but there's some controversy here that we're looking at head on a little bit. These are big questions, and so we'll toss out those pitches to you. And just to set this up for our audience here, what we're digging into is if we look at the floating peg for silk and the fact that on any given month or even in a real wild week in the market, there could be 2 cents of variance in silk's price action. That's not uncommon at all to see that. So is that a bug? Like, oh no, silk be broken. Something's amiss here. Or is that actually one of silk's like awesome features that people are just catching on to and haven't yet quite seen the full beauty of? So that's where we're going today. And I think maybe if you could tee us off just by riffing a little bit on conceptually, when we talk about volatility, when we talk about purchase power retention over time, and why purchase power changes over time, where do you go with those ideas in connection to silk? Where would you take us?
I think I'd start with ultimately prices are a negotiation. They're a contract, an exchange. I give you, 2 apples, you give me 2 oranges, right? And if all of society said that essentially 1 apple equals 1 orange, and that was a permanent ratio forever into perpetuity, we would say that's a very stable exchange rate, right? Now, you could have a world where a bunch of deer come in and eat up a bunch of the apple trees, and suddenly the consensus around that exchange rate is going to see some change because now there's less apples. So now, as the person selling apples, I'm going to require you to give me more oranges because the supply of this asset over here is more scarce. So when you think about volatility and you connect it to that analogy, the whole world is just a big game of consensus, of agreement. And volatility is when our agreements, all these millions of little agreements that we all make all the time with each other, all this different exchanging, when that consensus changes very quickly, that is what volatility is. And so a stable asset is just something that has a lot of people agreeing on its underlying value and its ability to exchange with other things at a stable ratio over the course of time. So that's kind of where my head goes to with volatility.
Yeah. And when, like, my guess is, so when someone says, hey, silk's floating peg, that precludes it from viable mainstream global adoption someday as use of money. Like that, the fact that there is going to be a little bit of variance in that price action there. I know you're like a very open-minded, like logical, reasonable thinker, which means that you aren't just sweeping that under the rug. Like you've thought about it and you would be able to probably persuasively argue that side even because you've thought about it so deeply. So when someone says that, like, hey, I am uncomfortable with the little bit of volatility that silk has, it that feels like that can't be viable money for the future. Where do you take that?
I think it's all about your reference currency and how tied you are to your reference currency. For instance, if all of your commerce you used a volatile asset, let's say 100% of your commerce is in the form of Bitcoin, um, I'm thinking that type of person isn't going to say, like Silk's variance to the dollar, that plus or minus 2 cents on a monthly basis, like that's a bit volatile for me. It's like, no, because you're already comfortable with holding all of your wealth in an asset that doesn't debase but experience a lot of volatility because the consensus around that value is always changing. So the traditional criticisms around silk volatility are people that are very sovereign currency sensitive. And in fairness, the vast majority of people are sovereign currency sensitive because you're doing your commerce with the dollar, with the euro, with the yen, right? And so that's why silk has a psychology problem. The psychology problem is until merchants and until people start pricing their things in the form of silk, we're always going to be competing with the fact that one USD equals, $1 equals $1 in someone's mind. Like that is their base of value that they measure everything in. Until we can get people thinking one silk equals one silk, and I measure that chair, that's roughly 2.3 silk in my head, or 2.4 silk. Right now, it's like, oh, that chair is $2.3, which then should equate to a certain amount of silk, right? Everything is still referencing back to those base sovereign currencies, and that is why what we're doing is absurd. It's why what we're doing is so unbelievably ambitious, is making a new stable form of currency that has its own reference that we want people to get comfortable with. And it's an interesting one because it's tapping into many assets and currencies to define that reference point. So it's truly beautiful, and it's going to take a long time and a lot of liquidity for people to get comfortable with that volatility. But yeah, I guess in summary, until people start performing commerce with silk and are pricing things in silk, we're going to be stuck with people that say, I don't like any variance from my sovereign currency of choice unless you're appreciating in value against that. Because then most people that I've seen, like people that bought silk at $1.05 and now it's over $1.10. Most of those people are very happy with the volatility. They're going to be unhappy with the volatility, of course, if their sovereign currency gains value against silk. Naturally, the reason silk has such a beautiful long-term proposition is sovereign countries are almost always incentivized to inflate themselves. They're almost always incentivized to expand the amount of money in circulation, because it's a big game of transferring wealth from middle class, lower class, wherever the money is, towards where they want to push value into. It's the power of centralization forces, with an agenda, and it's not perfectly transparent. It's not what I would call programmatically fair. And so that's why I think silk is going to probably have that long-term price appreciation, is because I don't trust the largest governments in the world to have sound monetary policy in relation to inflation. I think history has proven that thesis to be largely correct.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the trust is going to grow. It's not going to come from people pricing things in silk. That's going to take like 200 years. I will be dead before
Yeah.
that happens. And I think one day it will happen, but I will be probably dead before that happens. But I do think the building up of trust towards enough people using silk such that they're pricing things in silk will come from the fact that silk outperforms the greed of centralized monetary policy.
Yeah, and like the transactional shift from like, oh, I think in USD to I think in silk, that is a new language, basically speaking analogously. Like that is as difficult as learning a new language, and the only incentive to move that direction would be a deeper ideological shift, like really a shift in the way that we look at money and at the world. And you're kind of starting to dig at some of the roots with the stuff that you're saying here about reading the sentiment in the room related to how people think about currency. I mean, if you said some of these things like, well, governments just print over time, like they're incentivized to do that. That's the trend. Like you said that a decade ago, and you look like a person with a tinfoil hat on, and just sound kind of paranoid and conspiratorial. But if you read the room of sentiment uh, in so many, United States, Europe, wherever, um, that's how people, that's how the Gen Pop feels and looks at the world. So what I would love to know from you is, what do you think that ideological shift is that would precede the moment? Because it's fun to talk about a moment where somebody gives a debit card and the merchant literally accepts silk, not silk that's been sold and transacted. That's already happening. We're already there in adoption, which is amazing. But what's the ideological shift that needs to turn and needs to keep churning for us to get there, you think?
I think right now the majority of people's wealth are kind of in these. They're in banks. It's very siloed off from the rest of the world. Like if there's one thing that blockchain is opening up, it's genuine global connectivity where I can send money to anyone anywhere in the world. I can put my money into thousands, tens of thousands of financial products are merely clicks away without all of the friction and red tape versus like a bank. Like, I got my $20,000 in there and then I can only use those bank's products. And then if I want to shift that money somewhere else, then I'm signing all this paperwork. And so they're intentionally creating friction to entrap your money so that they can profit off of it. I mean, like if you think about like the original job of a bank, it was, hey, I don't trust myself to put money under the mattress because someone might break into my house and steal it. And so then the bank's original service was like custodianship, where like my sole job is to protect your money. Like
Mm-hmm.
my job isn't necessarily like the lending and borrowing and creating all the yield. It was purely like, let me protect your money for you. And like naturally all these other, financial products have spun off beyond it, but they're not incentivized to connect you to seamlessly tens of thousands of other products such that your money would leave their platform. And so I think the psychological shift is as people start to exit the old order traditional financial ecosystem, and there's a myriad of reasons they might do it. Um, One might be the custodianship piece, that like more and more people become skeptical that the government and banks have your property rights in the form of your currency and your labor, that they might not have your best intentions in mind. So like I do want to custody my own stuff. That might be one reason. Another reason would be, hey, there is a playground of global products that can generate yield, that I can express myself, hedge myself, do all these things, and you're not letting me do that, Fidelity or TD America. So like
Mm-hmm.
let me get my money out of the system. Let me get it on a blockchain, and I'm comfortable storing all of my wealth, or the vast majority of my wealth, on a blockchain. We're still very far away. We're like, I would say we're still 20, 30 years out from that paradigm, but it's coming quicker than people think. So I think, yeah, what's the turning point? The moment where people stop having this 100% kind of dollarized mindset is when the whole world is truly interwoven with each other in a permissionless way.
Yeah, that's good. And I think people really are waking up to the fact that just holding your money in the bank, like you've been able to do for hundreds and hundreds of years, like you do that, you're behind. You're behind. I talked to an Uber driver like a year ago, and from Nigeria, and he told me, like, yeah, I left my money in the bank back in Nigeria for 18 months and it lost something wild, like 40% of its value by leaving it there. I saw another headline recently that it said, America and the whole world we've become a planet of gamblers. If you look at sporting events and things like that this year, gambling and associated like costs are up more than ever. And all of a sudden in the United States, like more pro gambling legislation has it seems like it's a more favorable landscape for gambling than ever. Like, why is that? People are clamoring for it because they sense the reality that I'm behind. I have to do something significant to make up ground here. I mean, if we went back to your really like basic analogy of oranges and apples, that works if we have trust that the supply is basically constant for those product, for those commodities over time. But if all of the sudden I find out that you have created an infinite orange tree while the apples are constant here, and you're printing oranges, like the supply demand dynamics of that are broken, and it's now disingenuous. It's like it is a lie, it is fallacious to operate under the same premise of that 1-to-1 ratio. And yeah, like people are seeing that with the US dollar, that a dollar now since 2020 is down 25% in purchase power value. If Balaji just had a like wild like mega thread the other day too. People are all up in arms about US debt of 30 trillion, but he's like, no, that's not accurate. It's actually much worse than that. Because the all-in liabilities for the US, if you look at like future expenses that are on the books, it's 175 trillion. And so what's the only way out from that? Like what's the only thing you can do for an empire in that situation? It is the same playbook from hundreds of years, thousands of years of financial history about dominant, world currencies. You throw that Hail Mary. You throw that Hail Mary because that's all you can do in the playbook, and so you print. And like I want to go back to the merchant piece if you're cool with that. So when I think about like what is it that would incentivize a merchant to say, I'm actually going to take your silk on this debit card, like give me silk on the blockchain. What would make a business, what would make hundreds of businesses think that way? And I think it's this growing tidal wave of seeing behind the curtain that a dollar doesn't equal a dollar, like 2023 dollar doesn't equal 2024 dollar. And so they're willing to take that tiny measured dose of volatility because that is actually a more honest formula for stability in long term. So that's kind of my thesis, is that measured volatility is actually the most honest approach to stable asset design. And I'm curious what you think about that.
I think it's a beautiful way of framing it. I think the other side of the puzzle too, and this won't be true just for Silk, but for all of cryptocurrencies, is like, why are we letting something like Visa sit in the middle and charge merchants an extra 2-3%? When the merchant, if they can just learn to use a blockchain, we can disintermediate all of those centralized. That's been the whole promise of crypto, is disintermediate the middleman. So like stable forms of currency like Silk can make it cheaper. The products that the merchant is offering can be at a lower price because the transaction fees are cheaper, right? Once again, that promise is true not just for Silk, but for like everyone shifting to blockchains in general.
Yeah.
But like your measured volatility concept, I think for people to wake up to that truth, they need to see and realize the volatility of their purchasing power with a dollar, and essentially lose trust in it and be like, what's the alternative? Like, I feel trapped here, and like our generation, we're seeing financial nihilism emerge, right? Like, I think that's the term that's being tossed around, where it's kind of like, screw it, like I'm already behind, I'm already debt laden, so like I'm gonna go buy the lottery ticket, I'm gonna go bet on the football game, I'm gonna do that because like at least then I can have some hope. I can have some hope that something could change. Versus if I just keep grinding away at my everyday job, I'm not going forward. I'm actually going backwards. The very currency I hold is working against me.
Yeah.
And the only way that gets fixed, that the dollar gets fixed, is there's a quote out there that says, usually the most ethical thing to do is the thing you want to do the least. And I think essentially like in the United States government, it's like the ethical thing is to restore integrity to your currency, and the way you do that is by backing it by assets that can't be debased, by returning to some form of a monetary standard that has truth codified into it. But we are now in a post-truth world, and the problem with living in a post-truth world is it hurts people. It means that honest labor is no longer honestly treated, and people are waking up to that fact. And the sad part is they're choosing gambling, they're choosing nihilism, when really what we need to do is we need to be choosing better tools. We need to be choosing Bitcoin, and ultimately I think we need to be choosing Silk. Bitcoin suffers from the problem of essentially everyone who buys it now, every year that goes by, you're buying it from the people that bought it previously. And so the price of Bitcoin is going to be going up and up and up. And there is a form of the first come first served person was the one that benefited from the late entrance into the ecosystem. So even though Bitcoin has all of these wonderful properties that are going to make it absurdly valuable, there's still a form of wealth centralization and network centralization built into it. Something like Silk is not designed to price appreciate. That's not its main property. It's a byproduct of tracking lots of other volatility, but its nature is not to be a speculative vehicle. It's to be a form of measured volatility, like a mapping of the measured volatility that exists in the entire world, to kind of use your frame of reference. So why Silk over something like Bitcoin one day is like the ultimate form of currency, is because 10 years from now, someone should be able to buy Silk, and the system shouldn't become more centralized as they enter into the system. It shouldn't be like shoving wealth to the first entrance. It should be treating them in an equitable and fair fashion. So that would be one of my arguments for why Silk
Yeah,
versus Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin's great. It's the world's first non-debasing asset, but it still is wealth concentration.
yeah. There's a few people have kind of popularized this term over the last year. I've seen it that we have discovered that there are different kinds of moneyness. Like money maybe has more layers and flavors than we thought. And while it sounds really nice as a headline to say, Bitcoin is the money, Ethereum is the money, in some sense, yeah. But as you pointed out a couple times now, like when you talk about actually going to like punch a transaction with something that is by nature a speculative asset, even if it gets to, multiple double-digit trillion dollars, there's still going to be volatility baked into that. We need a form of stability to be able to transact in, and that's what Silk is aiming to do. Ultimately, like what we're kind of both getting at is that the definition for stability that we've been sold with the largest stable coins, the prescription the doctor wrote there, that actually isn't the cure for the disease. Like it's a weak 100 is a very weak definition for stability when you look at the true nature of the economic landscape and what's happening with fiat. And so basically the tide turning that we're talking about here is like people have the chance to they have to digest a better and truer definition of stability. Without that happening, it doesn't have a chance. So Silk's not going to go anywhere if people don't buy a better definition of stability that is purchase power preservation over time through measured volatility. Would you agree with that?
No, I would completely agree, and I think what's really cool is Silk is ultimately an index of a bunch of things that have valuable properties. Like for instance, like gold and Bitcoin, their valuable properties is their debasement resistance, right? And then the rest of the currencies included, they're valuable because they have should have low degrees of volatility. Over time, though, over the course of like 100 years, things like the dollar have a high degree of volatility because of inflation, like on a long time frame. But they're kind of the best we got right now. The cool part about Silk is as kind of the consensus and the speed of consensus around all these assets change over time, um, pieces, like the weight of consensus we're giving to any given part of it shrinks. Like silk a year ago, the dollar's weight I think was around 40%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now the weight is down to like 32, 33%. And I think what's so fascinating about that is like as the world has transferred wealth into gold and Bitcoin because of kind of the shakiness around the dollar's strength, it's like silk it absorbs that transfer of consensus, and now we value the dollar less within our definition of stability. It's automatically, it's managed by the free market. So as long as we can have enough things that silk is tracking, we're allowing the free market to tell us what it values as stability. And so if the US government decides, let's add more integrity to our system, let's get this thing under control, guess what's going to happen? The dollar's portion of silk's peg is going to increase again as the consensus shifts back from all these other assets. And so I think like that was always the dream of silk is we don't the designers of silk, we don't know what true stability is. But what we can do is have an index of many, many things that are transacted and used a lot. And then you let the free market evolve the consensus of what stability is. And then you have a basket automatically evolve around the free market's consensus of that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. One of the headlines from Silk's performance over the last year, up basically 5% against the US dollar in the last 12 months. The same against euro, up 5%. And then I think versus the Japanese yen, like maybe 17%. What do you, let's get emotional here. Like, how do you vibe that price action? Like, do you sit back and go like, yeah, that seems about right? Relative appreciation, like gut level reaction to those figures after a year when you hear them. What do you think?
Oh, gosh. I mean, my gut level reaction was more than we expected. I mean, I think like it shows how volatile, how much change the fabric of financial trust is changing very rapidly,
Mm-hmm.
and it's happening faster than we expected, and that's reflected in that much market cap transfer and trust transfer from currencies to commodities. That's crazy. 5%. I mean, that's crazy. What will be crazy if we see 5% year over year over year over year over year, and suddenly silk's at like $1.50, because then the story of silk is just like it's so strong and clear. But you also don't want to count out sovereign currencies. Like I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know, but that's the whole point. We don't know. We design silk with the one thing we don't know is you can't predict the future, right? And we have to have the tools to evolve silk over time. And I think we picked a really strong starting point. We want to I think right now like every 5 years is like a good benchmark for how often you want to change. If you change things too often, then people can't even trust the fabric of the underlying currency. But my guess is like 5 years from now when we reflect, I'm guessing the commodities will make up a larger portion than we would have ever imagined. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's just like the world saying the last 60 years of monetary policy post World War II, like screw fiat currencies. We want to go back to things that can't be debased. And maybe that's Silk's role within the world of Web3 as we're the only stablecoin brave enough to match and mirror that paradigm of trust transfer and change.
Mm, yeah. We're going to start to land the plane here a little bit. We could go on this for several hours. What else is like percolating in your mind that you want to let out of its cage? Are there other pieces of this that you would throw in as we start to bring it home?
I think yeah. I recently wrote a post about called like rejecting financial nihilism, essentially, and having like a return to a cyberpunk, as I call it, although cypherpunk is what preceded it, ethos. And I think the beauty of something like silk is it technically is the solution to financial nihilism. Financial nihilism exists because people are earning, like they're working, producing value, and then receiving value that isn't actually stable enough. And so it should be our mission to educate and make silk as accessible to the masses as possible. Imagine like you earned your paycheck and you were like in dollars from your bank or from Venmo or from PayPal, and you were one click away from turning your paycheck into a actually truly stable store of value. Like that
Yeah.
that's kind of where my head goes to. Like if silk is what we think it is, and we can't say we think it is, we can't say it is what we think it is. Silk is not even a year old. Like we need 5 years before I think we can confidently say like every single person on planet Earth should be holding. It's like there is a lot of data left to be collected. There are a lot of unknowns with what has been built. But as we do start to see silk start to perform, you start to think to yourself like, if silk is the solution to financial nihilism, if it is a better store of measured volatility than the dollar, we got to make this thing way more accessible. That's got to be like
Yeah.
mission statement number one, is just make silk accessible to the masses.
I love that. And it makes me think, like, I guess the antidote to hopeless nihilism is really a sense of agency. Being able to put on a set of glasses and realize that no, I do have tools and resources at my disposal. Like silk is a tool in the tool belt, but I'm even thinking bigger of
Yep.
like a super app for private DeFi. What if that existed? Oh wait. So like and people come on to Shade and you can employ any, I like the phrasing you often use, any form of financial self-expression that you want. Amp up risk from 0 to 1,000, like based off of your strategies in there. But anywhere you go from 0 to 1,000, like whatever your strategy is, like Silk is probably going to be a really valuable part of that. And it is so powerful to realize that someone could go from, I don't want to say too much here, but I think this is a true story, that this is an opportunity for people to go from a place of like deep defeat and hopelessness, that place of nihilism that you're talking about, to realizing that no, there are avenues for agency that I can pursue with like this suite of private DeFi where Silk is going to do me right. Silk is a helpful tool in that tool belt, and that's a really cool story to be able to share with people. Like it feels good.
I store my money in silk because it respects the value of my labor better than the dollar does.
Wow.
And it also does honestly like that. I mean, I think that is just profoundly powerful. And the thing is, like right now globally, there's people in other countries where their sovereign currency disrespects their labor so much that 6 months go by and they've lost 40% of their value. And so for them, a dollar respects their labor more than whatever their country's currency is. But I think the U.S. could get into a situation where trust in it collapses, and then where do you turn?
Yeah.
Where is there stability? And Bitcoin will not be the answer, because Bitcoin is going to have so much volatility, so much wealth centralization of the people that were there first, that we continue to recreate kind of a disenfranchised. It's just like it's a huge problem. So can we create an asset that's not meant to transfer value from newcomers to latecomers?
Yeah.
Right? That because that's the fairness that we're trying to create here. The reason the dollar is falling apart is people are transferring value from one set of participants to another. Silk doesn't do that at scale in like an exponential way. There is some advantages to coming to Silk sooner rather than later, because obviously we're tracking a basket that we think will outperform whatever sovereign currency you're holding. But it's not meant to be a speculative asset. It's meant to store your hard work in a way that's better than any other stable form of currency. And if we can fulfill that promise, make it globally accessible, I mean that's beautiful. It's makes your stomach drop with how stupid and big and bold of a vision it is.
Yeah, and it's awesome to be on that road, like watching seeing the signs, getting closer to that destination, watching the miles click down on the odometer as you pass, various checkpoints. It's not theoretical. Like, that is where this car is moving towards. And so it's fun to be a part of, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for breaking it down for us, Carter. Any last words for people who hung out with us and made it all this way to the end of our conversation?
Yeah, I would just say be sure to get involved in the community, the Telegram, the Discord, the Twitter, X. All of these, there's still so much thinking ahead of us, so much research ahead of us, so many places Silk needs to go that it hasn't gone. Um, it's cutting edge, but the one thing I can promise you is we're really trying to operate with a very long-term perspective in mind. We're trying to get away from the urgency of like, oh, like panic, need to create price go up, need this, need that, need number go up, and we're just really trying to say like, all right, like forget monetary incentives. Like if you wipe that off the table and you try to think with like a 20-30 year perspective in mind, how do we use our time right now? How do we slowly but surely build the foundation for something that will outlast us? What
Mm,
does it mean to actually participate in an open source money that leaves a legacy that we're proud of? And I think like 2 years ago when we started the Silk journey, I don't know if the mindset was fully there in the sense that like it's really easy to talk about an idea. It's a lot harder to execute on it. And so that you kind of need just like the tomfoolery, the creativity and the energy of like, let's just go see if we can do this thing. But now that it's there and it's live, now the deep breath is here. Now it's like, whoa, like there's a weight here and a responsibility. And I just invite you to join us on that journey of making truly unstoppable finance that will stand the test of time. So.
yeah. Oh, that's like a rich invitation. And like, just to piggyback on that, like, this is different, right? We're talking about a stable coin. We're not talking about something that's going to build that generational wealth of the meme coin or whatever. We know you're not going to log into CoinGecko every day and look at Silk price and see like, how's it doing? Am I rich yet? Like, that's not it. But if you believe that a product that brings private stability to the world, like a better definition of stability, like we talked about, if you believe that's a net good, then like get on the train, right? Like, follow Silk Stable on Twitter, get in touch with our amazing community, just like strap in, like hang with us for a long ride. This is a long time horizon that we're on, and we'd love to have you be a part of it if you resonate with that vision for private stability. So we do appreciate our community for sure.
I think they always say like artists and like philosophers and explorers, they're like the trailblazers for culture in many ways, right?
Hmm.
They're front running the desires and the undertow of the world that are having a hard time expressing, right? And so like I'd like to think that Shade Protocol with its ethos of digital sovereignty, independence, privacy, and stability. Like I'd like to think we're going to have a community, and we already do in many ways, a community of philosophers, um, first and foremost. And I hope in the next wave, beyond just like financial philosophers, that we will have literally artists, like and the many different modules of culture start to get behind this energy and this vision, because that's what it takes to change the world. If it's just a bunch of financial nerds in the corner, it's not enough. So whoever you are, whatever your skills are, there is a place for you here, to contribute.
Yeah, that's real talk. Thanks, Carter. Thanks for breaking it down for us. Appreciate your time. And I know that listeners who made it here to the end found some value and benefit from everything that you've shared. So appreciate it.
Appreciate you as well, sir. Till the next time.
Yep, we'll do it again. Later.